Welcome back. Hope you can hear me. Looks like there's slightly more than half here. We're wondering if we were so popular that you couldn't wait till the afternoon session and you've snuck into this one instead. So welcome. I'm pleased to be the first female up on this stage today. There are more to come in the afternoon, this afternoon. My name's Zara Whysall. I'm Head of Research and Product at Lane 4, and I'm really pleased to be co-hosting this session with Tom today on why the best never stop learning. It's a subject that Tom and I have been working on for some time now, in fact since before the last conference, and so we decided a joint presentation would give you the best of both worlds, so an insight into the research underpinning as well as insights into how this can be applied in practice.
Great. Thank you. And I'm Tom Smith. And I'm not the first male to have come up, and we've had some fantastic inputs. And actually already, I think we've been nicely set up around the subject that we're going to be talking about today. Adrian mentioned in his piece around the importance of learning mindset and performance under pressure. And that's what we're going to be looking at in a little bit more detail this session and the parallel session that's happening. So afterwards, when you finish from here, you'll go and see the other one, and together you'll get a sense of what it is that we're talking about in terms of that it's more than just about ability. Okay, so like Zara said, we've been working together on this for over a year now, trying to understand what actually goes into this notion around people that do well, elite performers, regardless of whether they're in sports or in organizations, have this curiosity that Adrian mentioned. And what we want to spend the 45 minutes that we've got with you approximately is to explore what that means at an individual level, and why is it that some organizations, what is it about some organizations that allows individuals to do better in those situations? So if somebody has that learning mindset, why is it that some organizations are able to get more out of them than others? So we'll look at some of the organizational factors as well. So can we have the video clip, please?
Clearly in some sports, being the right shape and height is a predeterminant, but actually it's quite remarkable how few sports that is the case, and in many others there are clearly much more general traits that allow people to develop to become absolutely world class.
There's quite a lot of discussion in sport generally about facilitation versus talent, and which is the way to deliver best performance, and there's a bit of a push at the moment towards actually it's more about facilitation than it is the talent.
Obviously they have to have the basic physiology, they have to have a basic grasp for the sport, but importantly a quality they require is the ability to learn, the ability to change something, and when they change, maintain that change.
This notion of trainability, the extent to which people are willing to adapt themselves and ultimately adapt the environments that they operate in order to achieve at the highest level.
So clearly in sports, and we've heard about that already this morning, this notion of trainability and the fact that ability itself isn't enough is something that they take very seriously. Peter made in his example something that it takes up to 10 years to get somebody who's identified as talent early on to actually make it to be good enough to compete in an Olympic final. So in businesses, when you think about your graduate entry-level programs, your talent programs, how long do we persevere with individuals? And what is it that we look at when we make a decision as to whether they're going to make it at the very end? So, can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so something about potential that we're looking for is around capacity to develop into something in the future. So we're making decisions very often, and I know for colleagues in HR, you have a lot of performance data, and what you want to make is a leap into whether that performance data is a predictor of future potential. I'm quite attracted by this quote that Zara shared with us when we were developing this early on, which is this notion that future demands may include different skills from those that are valued today. the ability to learn from experience may prove to be more important in the long run. And I was reminded by David listening to his experience when he started off with cards in his early days as a programmer and Fortran, and I just about remember those days as well. And when you look at the IT world, at the rate at which changes have been made, where people were being recruited because of their experience in C++, and already in 4 years that's been overcome by a new set of skills that are required. And that doesn't mean that you get rid of everybody that came in with C++ and go on another recruitment drive. I'm sure recruiters would love you to do that, of course, because what you need is to make more of the individuals that you have. So it's this notion at the rate at which change is happening, that people are being provided for by universities and apprenticeship schemes, etc., that actually when you have them ready, the world has moved on. And so therefore, what are you going to do about it? So for us, it's a little bit about what's inside this model. And so this notion that we've just heard from the examples in sport, we believe applies just as much in organizations and in business, is this notion that if we just assess for ability, it's never quite going to be enough. It's never going to give you enough in terms of being able to get a handle on what the individual can do going forward in the organization. And the session downstairs, what you'll be doing after this session, will be looking at what personal resilience means. So in terms of somebody's potential, personal resilience is one part of it. We're going to be homing in on the left-hand side onto the bits around the learning mindset. So potential, this ability to do something in the future, is a function of the ability, what the 6'5" person can do physiologically that allows them to be able to do that, combined with these two things. What we'll be doing towards the end of the talk is, what is the role of the organization? And the role of the organization, of course, is to provide that opportunity. So if you've got a good measure of what an individual can do and what he is capable or she is capable of doing, what their potential is, what is the organization doing about it? So we'll explore that towards the end.
So what are the factors that influence an individual's capacity to learn? Research in sport and business has shown this to be an important predictor of an individual's future success. In fact, in sport, the quality of an athlete's learning strategies has been shown to be even more important than either their knowledge of technique or their years of experience. So there's a lot that we can learn from the field of sport in this area. And in true Lane 4 style, the framework that you see here, it is based on a review of the latest research from all different areas, from business to sport, to medicine and the military. So I'm just going to take you through this framework now, or at least some of the key parts of it, otherwise we'd be here all day. And this framework is assessed by the self-reflection questionnaire that many of you completed prior to this session, so you might want to bear that in mind as I talk through it. So, at the heart of the model is self-perception and a drive to learn. And self-perception consists of two elements. Firstly, self-awareness. So individuals need to have an accurate understanding of their strengths and weaknesses. But also, they need to have some self-belief, a degree of self-belief that they can make a success of various tasks and achieve various skills. But like Adrian mentioned earlier, that also needs to be balanced with a drive to continually improve performance, a drive to learn. And equally, that drive to learn needs to be not just the academic learning of new facts and interesting things, but actually applying that in practice to have an effect on performance. So if we consider those are things that people should have, the things around the edge are more the things that people should do. So first of all, embrace challenge. It's really important for learning that people stretch themselves, because we don't learn a great deal from cruising along in our comfort zones. And people who've worked with Lane 4 for some time will be aware of the concept of a fixed and growth mindset. And that's a really strong underpinning of this part of the model. So just quickly then, the concept of a fixed and growth mindset, it's about somebody's fundamental beliefs about talent, essentially. So somebody with a fixed mindset is of the belief that essentially talent is innate. So it's what you're born with. So geniuses are just born, and there's not a great deal that you can do to shift your level of ability in a particular area. Whereas a growth mindset, people are very much of the opinion that ability is largely learnt So there's an awful lot that you can do to increase that ability through hard work and persistence and such like. And there's been loads of research in this area to show the strong effect that these mindsets can have on our behaviour and our performance, particularly in the area of learning, and the extent to which people are comfortable with embracing challenges. I'll give you an example. Carol Dweck's a Stanford psychologist who's done lots of research in this area, and she got a group of school children, and she asked them to complete a load of problems. And then she gave them some feedback on their performance. Half of them, she praised them for their effort. So she said, you know, wow, it was American, so gee, wow, you really tried hard. And the other half, they were praised for their ability. So they were told, you know, wow, you're really smart. And first of all, what she found was that that type of feedback led them into a fixed and a growth mindset, respectively. So those that were praised for their intelligence had adopted a fixed mindset. Those that were praised for their effort adopted a growth mindset. But interestingly, they were then asked to complete another set of problems. But they were given an option: either complete an easier set or a more difficult, challenging set where there's an opportunity to learn. And she found distinct differences. The people with the fixed mindset, 67% of them chose to go for the easier set, whereas 92% of those with the growth mindset chose the harder set of problems because they were up for the challenge, they wanted to learn. So you can see, first of all, the importance that feedback has, and we'll come back to this later, but also the type of mindset has a strong effect on how we react to setbacks or mistakes. So a final twist to the study was that she then asked these children to report their scores on this test anonymously to other children. And what she found was that 40% of the fixed mindset children, they lied about their score. They obviously gave a higher score than they actually got, compared to just 10% of those with the growth mindset. So in terms of the implications for business and organizations, first of all, as I said, there's clear implications for how the type of feedback that we give people affects their mindset and therefore their behavior. Also, there's what messages are we giving, and how is that reinforcing how people are going to respond to setbacks, to mistakes? Are they likely to hide those mistakes, or are they going to be quite comfortable with admitting those mistakes? Because clearly that's key to learning. So moving on from embracing challenge then, the next area, which I'm sure you won't be surprised about, it's important that people seek feedback, so they're receptive to feedback, and that they reflect on it. Sure, that's not a surprise, but what's less well known is that not all feedback is the same, it's not all as effective. So you can have adaptive feedback and maladaptive feedback, which is not maladaptive being not very helpful for learning, particularly when it comes to critical feedback. And the difference is that the maladaptive reflection is characterized by the individual just focusing on the negative emotions, their own negative emotions linked up with that piece of feedback, as opposed to actually thinking about the meaning of it. So there have been studies which have shown that people with a fixed mindset, in fact brain scan even studies, have shown that they are so focusing on processing the negative emotion of the feedback or the event that they completely miss the learning points altogether. So again, some important points for us to pick up on. And the difference, the skill here, is to be able to self-distance, to be able to put yourself in other person's shoes when you're hearing that feedback, so that you can experience the emotion, but not be completely overpowered by it. And you can actually reflect on that piece of information to generate some meaning from it that you can learn from. So we must also move on from reflection, from the broad to the narrow. So it's important to distinguish between reflection at that broad level to actually we need to move on and make a decision about what we can do differently. And since some people get stuck reflecting at that broad level, it's important to make that distinction, because they're unable to actually decide what to do differently. And you might not be surprised to know that we're quite resistant to changing our strategies, even when failures are quite severe. So why is that? You can actually look to a lot of biases in our decision-making as to where learning falls down at this stage. So for example, you might be familiar with attribution errors or locus of control. Essentially, this is about how we explain events to ourselves or others. So we have a biased tendency to explain successes by more internal, personal characteristics. So that was down to something that's about me, whereas we tend to put down our failures to external factors. And by doing that, we're not actually taking responsibility for doing something differently. So you can see how your decision at this stage might be, it was down to external factors, therefore I don't need to do anything differently here. Another example there is confirmation bias. We tend to look for information that supports what we already know, what we already knew, or the strategy that we're already following. So I don't know if Adam, the surgeon's still here. I don't want to pick on doctors, but unfortunately a lot of this research is in the medical field. There was a study with experienced physicians which found that the more effective physicians, in terms of they gave more effective treatment recommendations, they learnt from both successes and failures equally. And again, this was brain scan data so they could look at what they were paying their attention to. Whereas the less effective physicians, the ones who actually fairly frequently, worryingly, made, let's say, suboptimal, they made the wrong treatment recommendations, less effective treatment recommendations. They were actually focusing just on their successes. So they were getting feedback on how they were doing, but they were just focusing on the ones that were right, the ones that went well. And this all sort of comes down to how hard it is to unlearn, because if we're biased towards paying attention to what we did well, then we'll actually be reinforcing that behavior. So we'll be reinforcing bad habits, if you like, without realizing that we're doing it. And that leads us on to the final part of the puzzle, which is practice. Now, I'm sure many of you would agree that this is something that rarely happens in business. If anybody disagrees with that, I'd love to hear from you afterwards. And in fact, one of our sports psychologists, I don't think he's abroad, but Charlie Unwin, in reflecting on lessons that we can take from the Olympics, he remarked that athletes spend 90% of their time practicing and 10% of their time performing, whereas in business, we're lucky if we get the opposite. And I would definitely agree with that. But this is in spite of the fact that practice is so important for learning, and it comes down to basic brain mechanics. So I'm sure some of you will be familiar with how learning happens. If you've read books like The Talent Code, you'll be aware of the importance of myelin, for example. So every experience has a physical change, has a physical impact on the brain. So let's say a neuron, a brain cell fires, sends a signal across the neural pathway, and the more frequently that's repeated, the more insulation that builds up on that neural pathway. So the quicker our thought processing gets, essentially. So that's why practice is a good thing. And also, not only the quicker it gets, but also the more sophisticated and accurate it gets, because more pathways get built connecting different pieces of information in the brain. So this is why it takes a while to become good at something. You're building those pathways and strengthening them. And it's the same for any skill, whether it's learning the piano or honing your golf swing or learning how to do a presentation well. No comments on whether I'm there yet. And it's also important to note, I'm sure many of you will have heard of the 10,000 hours principle. It was mentioned earlier. So this is Erickson, a psychologist, not Gladwell, the journalist who publicized it in his book, who found that, yes, it takes a long time to become an expert at something. This 10,000 hours figure was cited. And the reason is because of practice and the importance of experience. But actually, there is, again, evidence with doctors to show that, with GPs, in fact, to show that performance can get systematically worse with experience. And so this leads me to think of the phrase, practice makes perfect. And as Tom informed me of, a delightful correction to that from, I think it was a coach of one of his children, who said it's not that practice makes perfect, it's that practice makes permanent. So whether that's good or bad habits, practicing, repeating them makes permanent. And so the important thing here is deliberate practice. You've got to actually be deliberately practicing. So that means paying attention to your weaknesses or your errors, breaking tasks down to actually hone those areas and getting feedback on how you're doing on it. And finally, you might be thinking, well, that just doesn't happen in business. That's just not realistic. I would agree it doesn't happen, but I would argue it's very important that it should happen. If a task is important enough, why aren't we practicing it? You know, whether it's an important pitch, whether it's a presentation, whether it's a difficult conversation, why aren't we making the time, prioritizing learning to actually practice those things? And finally, I'm sure you might also be familiar with the fact that in sport, evidence shows that it doesn't need to be physical practice. So mental rehearsal or visualization is equally effective. It has the same effect on the brain. So lots of information there to take in. And clearly the factors in this framework here, they focus on factors that can be developed to help individuals enhance their capacity to learn. As Tom suggested earlier, there are factors that relate to the organization, but we'll come to those later.
Now, if you're an individual and you're now very clear about what it is that you are, and even imagining that you're very strong in your learning mindset, in your desire to improve yourself and get better all the time, the reality is that in terms of the model, and remember, bear in mind that the personal resilience bit you'll get afterwards is this is your potential to improve yourself and to develop yourself in the organization or just in general to develop yourself. But the bit that we haven't taken into account is the opportunity that gets created by the organization. Because as a lot of you involved in managing your talent strategies in your organization, I'm sure you're aware of, is once you tell somebody that they have the potential, you actually got a bit of a ticking time bomb over there. They know that their value, not just to themselves, but almost like outside of the organization as well as inside, goes up significantly. So people know they're talented, you have to do something with it. So we'd like to explore a little bit about what we mean by the opportunity or the role of the organization. So individuals in their reports would not see data on these 4 factors over here, but if we were to run a survey for your organization or for a team in your organization and had 20 people complete it, what we would be able to give you is an indication of what the organization is against these 4 factors, which is around the degree to which honest feedback is provided. So what's the environment like for that? Does the environment allow for mistakes to be made? Right? Because that's an important feature on how people learn, that they make a mistake, they reflect on it, and they're able to improve on it. But if the environment doesn't sustain that, you're creating a problem there. And then, what is that opportunity? Typically, it's around stretch assignments, but what other opportunities? How brave is the organization to give people opportunities to improve themselves? As well as something for us that's quite fundamental is a belief in that individual's potential. It's not just about giving them a title in the organization, you're in the talent pool, it's actually what you're able to do about it. When you get that data, it might look like this, right? There's different ways that we might profile it. But for us, that's interesting because clearly the organization might say, yeah, we are very good at providing opportunities for individuals. We'll highlight them as talent. If they're in IT, we might move them into HR for a while. If they're in finance, they could do with a bit doing a role in the COO's office. Whatever it is, you will provide the opportunities. And there's enough good practice in HR and organizations to suggest the value of doing that. And of course, if you didn't have a belief in potential, you wouldn't be investing this amount of money anyway in identifying people and then taking them to leadership programs and business schools, etc. What we're interested in, of course, is what is the organization like in terms of its ability to allow for mistakes in the organization. Because if you'll give people the opportunity to try a new role and then not allow them the opportunity in turn to make a mistake, how does that performance get labeled in the organization? How quickly does somebody who's on the talent list all of a sudden be regarded as not being particularly talented? So what we're able to do by looking at the data at an organizational level is also give the organization some feedback that while some of the easier things to implement tactically, like opportunities might be in place, there may be other factors in there that might be getting in the way. And the ones that we're particularly interested in is the opportunity to make mistakes and the ability for people in the organization to give that honest feedback over there so people really are able to understand what it is that they need to work on. So normally, for those of you who've worked with Lane 4 for a while, this is the slide that we usually start with. And this is the slide that we're going to be finishing off with. Because this, again, as some of you will know, this is what Adrian used to see when he was training in Cal Berkeley. Every day in the changing rooms, the aim of this establishment is to create an environment where champions are inevitable. And the reason why we finish it with it, of course, is you have all that potential at your disposal in your organizations. You've got insight, or they will have insight as to what their potential really is, how they can improve their learning mindset, how they can make themselves more curious and learn more and be challenged more. But the environment piece, the organizational factors in there that makes that less or more likely is what gets created by the leaders themselves, the managers that lead this, the degree to which they're not just providing the opportunity, but also giving the feedback. The degree when the numbers aren't quite being met, right, to still make sure that people are able to make mistakes and the space for them to learn from it. And that for us is what learning mindset's about, a little insight into a tool to help people understand it better for themselves and for organizations collectively to understand how they promote a learning mindset in the organization or maybe get in the way of it. So in the last few minutes, I thought we'd give you an opportunity to ask questions about the model, about the work that we've been doing, about some of the research. It's over to you.